I'm resident of Collinwood, Joel Sage, joined by the author of the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, Patrick McCray. We're here to talk about the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. What a book, Patrick. I finished this bad boy really, really deep. This was a lot deeper than the last one. You wrote a lot more, you put a lot more in this version than the first version. So I have so many questions. My first one is, when you write the
Yeah.
when you write the day books, do you sort of know what you're going to put in them, or do you think about what you're going to put in them, and or just I guess
It
instinct, or
There's more instinct than anything else. I mean, it depends on the entry.
yeah.
Usually I have high points, and sometimes when I'm watching an episode, I'll get a really clear quote or insight or something like that, and I'll make a note of it to get back to. But once I'm in the middle of it, it kind of takes over. Yeah, there's a secret bad habit format to the daybook, and it's often this, unless it's something where I just have unbelievable clarity, in which case they almost write themselves, and there've only been a handful of those.
Yeah.
And what happens is that I'm goofing around in the first paragraph or so. I'm kind of making jokes and I'm goofing around because honestly, I don't always know what I'm going to say. But then it's through writing it, it's through doing it and writing it and being in the middle of it that the good ideas really get triggered. And usually my intention is to go through the full episode. But often, especially as I watch these things very early in the morning, it'll just be ultimately maybe one scene or one moment that sticks out. And so before I get to talking about the whole episode, I'll really fixate on that one moment. And I'll just follow that idea. And often I find that I've written a lot and that the essay just kind of feels organically complete.
Mm-hmm.
So I could keep going, but no, it's like that. I think I made a good point. If Wallace had any one concern, and Wallace has had some concerns about daybooks and daybook format over the years, and his notes are always perfect. I mean, it's like, and it's gotten to the point that when he, like, once a year, once every other year, he says, Patrick, let's talk about something. I'll be able to tell him what his concern is and say, yeah, okay, it's this and this and this, right? And he goes, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to do this and this instead. And he said, okay, terrific. And that's it. That's sort of what the note sessions are like. But yeah, that's a very long way of saying that more often than not, and this is true, I think, with any great art. Not that the daybook is great art, but just it is within the great art form of writing. Within any of those things, it's ultimately it's all jazz. It's all the act of creating is inherently inspiring and will fuel you more and more. I know you write novellas and novels and things like that and short stories. Do you find that you are more charged with new ideas for other things as you're actually writing the current thing? Have you ever experienced that?
All the time, actually.
Yeah, that's a healthy, common response.
Like, my biggest issue for myself is when I'm writing one story, and I like the story I'm writing, but my mind's like, hey, there's this story that's really good too that you could write, and it's like, I don't want to do that right now.
Yeah, you almost want to get the current thing over with so you can go to that one.
Yeah, it sort of feels like that too when you're writing. It's like, well, no, let's focus on this story, and then I end up doing more stories than I'm wanting to do on my blog, and it's like I can only post one blog per like so many times because you can't write two different blogs on Blogger, which is weird. But because it will post in a weird way. But for the daybook, for the Daybook UnBound, what went into the decision for this cover? When did you guys decide on the cover for the book?
The Flaming Cane.
Yeah, the Flaming Cane.
Cover.
When did
That
you
one?
guys decide it?
This cover was largely up to me. Wallace was working really hard on Unlovely Frankenstein stuff, and so we knew that he was going to be doing the print version, you know, the art design of the print version. I don't know what the cover for that's going to be. But this was sort of a cover specifically for the Kindle version, maybe the paperback version, I don't know. That was 11th hour. You know, I'm a big fan of, I teach Photoshop, and there are these things called actions, which are these bundled, sort of programmed series of steps that you can put an image through and it does something. And I belong to a service called Envato, where you can download all the actions you want for a whole year for one low price. And so there was this set stuff on fire action. And one of the things that Wallace had really wanted when we would talk about the cover and the art design is he said, Patrick, I really want it to feel like it's us very much in the universe visually of the first Daybook. Yeah. And so ultimately, I knew I was going to be using, you know, the font and that sort of design. And I thought, cane, wow, what if Barnabas's cane was on fire? And so I did that. And I did that several different ways. But then with that kind of dark blue background, my friend Peter suggested the dark blue would be good, because originally it was this stark white. And I thought, well, good, dark blue, that's a night color. It sort of sets itself off from the red and of the first book, and you still have the cane, but it was actually, there's a story to that image, because it had interesting symbolic significance. For one thing, when I came up with it, when I saw it at last, it just really seemed right, and it felt like a Dark Shadows image we had never gotten, but it felt like we should have, or that it somehow fit in with all of this. And then there's this weird thing where Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, right? And that's one of those crucial books to and the subtitle to that book is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. And Prometheus is the god who gave fire to humans and thus got punished for it. And so anytime you have someone who's doing something new, like Dan Curtis, they are a Promethean presence. And so the idea of the sword being this fire bearer was really important. And then I think it was maybe her husband, last name was also Shelley, or his pal Byron, one or the other. And I'm not up on that era of literature as much as I should be to be throwing references around like this, but wrote a poem called Prometheus Unbound, because he's chained to a rock as his punishment. And so this idea, Prometheus Unbound, and I had gone back and forth between several titles. One was Dark Shadows Daybook After Dark, and then Dark Shadows Unchained, because of, you know, Barnabas saying Unchained. But I thought that's very literal. That's very, okay, that's just about Barnabas. And then this Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, because also there's that Roger Corman Frankenstein Unbound movie that, you know, the Raul Julia. And so all of that was just playing around in my head. And when I saw that Flaming Cane image, it's like, no, we've got to call it Unbound. And so it ties into all that crazy stuff. So yeah, I'm glad you like the cover. There's a story behind it, and there it is.
If I could make a suggestion for when you guys release the print, if you go with like a different print or like a different cover, at least have the Flaming Cane on the inside somewhere.
You really like that?
I do. I think it really, because the one thing about books is it's sort of like buying a CD when you buy a book. Like when you go to the bookstore, it's a lot like going to a CD store. what's the first thing you notice? The cover, you know. And if
Yeah.
I saw that cover, whether I was a Dark Shadows fan or not, I'd pick it up because it looks cool.
It really, I'm not good at cool. And I talk about cool several places in the book. I have a whole essay about cool. I'm not good at cool.
I
And
think
so when it happens, it's like, wow, I leveled up.
I think you secretly are. You just don't realize it.
Well, I will take that. Thank you.
Well, that's the thing too. Like the first, see, I can tell you like the first CD I bought because I remember the cover. Like the first ever CD I bought was Garth Brooks Pieces, and it had like a puzzle piece on. It looked like a puzzle. And when I buy a book, it's the same thing. Like I see the cover, I want to pick up that book because I like the cover. I haven't read it yet. Then I read it and I'm like, oh, okay, I like the book. It's the same. It's sort of the same method. It's not the same as buying a DVD. Buying a book is a lot like buying an audio, like a music CD. So I love the cover. I love the cover you chose. It was really good. And that's the thing too. When you buy one book, like when you buy a sequel to a first book, and the cover is different, it doesn't feel like this. It doesn't. You don't look at that cover and go, "Oh, that's just the same as the last cover." No, this cover is completely different, and it catches your eye.
Well, I will keep it. I know that Wallace really liked it. When I showed it to him, he said, "Oh, this has a really good 70s kind of thriller vibe to it." And I was like, "I'll take it. Great. Thank you." Because that's a guy who knows his graphics. So, if I'm able to, gain purchase there, because if it's not good, Wallace is very tactful, but he's silent. There are two modes. There's silent Wallace, where you can probably make a different choice and probably be better off. And then there is vocal Wallace, where he will say, "Yeah, that's it. That's good." And he responded well to it.
Yeah, I hope you guys keep it no matter what. It's really, really good.
I'll
But
let him know.
with the Daybook Unbound on Kindle, I really like the I like how you got into Adam on this one, especially because it felt so good to just read and appreciate stuff being said about Robert Rodan. And I know like there are people who aren't fans of the Adam arc. So to get to read about it in your book in the sequel to the Dark Shadows Daybook was really, really cool. My favorite part so far though has been I love because there's things you don't have to get into, but when you get into the 91 series, that was really, really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, when that period is on TV,
Mm-hmm.
which is in January, February, March,
Mm-hmm.
it's competing against, sort of beginning to go into 1897. The Quentin haunting stuff is kind of interesting to check on now and then, but it's the end of 1795, which is very epic, and you've got that stuff. But you're competing against Parallel Time in 1970, which I like all parts of Dark Shadows, but I like some more than others. And it's to me still feels sort of like an extra. It's this other thing that they did while they were filming the movie. So so really, there would be times when I would check on the Dark Shadows wiki about which episodes had been filmed that day, and I would say, "Oh, it's a 91 episode," and I'd say, "Hey, Wallace, you mind if I do a 91 episode?" He says, "That's fine." So those were fun to do.
I love your tribute to Ben Cross because I agree with you. He wasn't the most important thing about it. He wasn't Jonathan Frid, and he didn't try to be Jonathan at all.
No, he had his friend Oscar, who could, vouch for his creative ability to, his little statue. Because Ben Cross Oscar winner, I think, for Chariots of Fire. Let's pretend he was, or he were. Yeah. So the Ben Cross thing when he died, was a real shock to me.
Yeah.
Because he was so young, and he was only 72, and Ben Cross, I did not run home from school to see the show. because of the era I grew up in. I was born 11 days after Dark Shadows went off the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of a new Dark Shadows had played across my mind since I first saw the original.
Mm-hmm.
What would that be like? And I remember when it was announced, I thought I was dreaming. I thought, wow, NBC's going to do, it's my favorite network, and NBC is going to do a big, splashy masterpiece theater level Dark Shadows. Okay. Because to be a Dark Shadows fan is to generally have to explain what this thing is to people.
Yeah.
And then after you explain it, if they watch and say, okay, well, it's so good, I'll watch an episode. And of course, you can't watch an episode of Dark Shadows. You'll be completely lost. And so I kept really wanting a way to say, here, this is it. And so when that show came along, I thought that was terrific. And I remember the first publicity shot, saw it around the time I was graduating high school, of Ben Cross with the cane, and just what a soulful look he had. You know, that this was a deep guy. Because most of the Barnabas shots were him and so on that Jonathan Frid did, because that was the era.
Yeah.
And this was very different. And so this was my guy. I really wanted to see this. And of course, it was the uncool kid next to Twin Peaks. And when I'd get friends to watch it, they'd say, I'd just rather be watching Twin Peaks. And so I was like, but it's, just watch Twin Peaks. And it still has made it tough for me to watch Twin Peaks, because I have this emotional memory of what was going on at the time. But it was nice. To be a Dark Shadows fan is to also stand there and say, attention must be paid. This is more than you give it credit for being. And since it's not obvious on just watching an episode, I will explain it if they'll listen. And that's a lot of what the Daybook is. A lot of the Daybook is me finishing conversations I never got to finish with people. And so the best thing happened, and it was a very humbling thing. A few months after I wrote that Ben Cross obituary, we got a letter from Ben Cross's daughter, who was very, very, very happy with it. And, Wallace and I have two very different attitudes about obituaries. Wallace is a newsman. He edited newspapers for decades. And as a reporter, he's trained as that. He is the real Carl Kolchak in a lot of ways. He really is. And so, Wallace's take is he wants to give people the cold hard facts of what their career was and sort of make that a summary. And I think that's terrific. For me, what I want to do is I want to explain why they mattered to me. And maybe, and based on the response I've gotten, which the memorials have always gotten good responses, maybe help articulate why this person matters to fans. And because often, when someone dies, it's such a big feeling that we're overwhelmed by the loss, and it's hard to articulate why they mattered and what was going on. And so to be able to do that's a real privilege.
You put I think this is like your third or fourth tribute to Mitch Ryan, and this was another in the Dark Shadows Daybook. I know you had written two on the Collinsport Historical Society, if I'm not mistaken.
And those are the two that are in there.
Yeah, and this one was just as important. I really liked how you put this one in the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. It really, really was really cool to read. I got sort of mad at HalloweenMovies.com for not writing anything about the late Mitchell Ryan's death. And I had something explained to me that websites like that have to get permission from the family members and stuff. And it's just like, yeah, but still.
What?
that's what I...
No, they don't. You can write about anything you want.
Yeah.
Anyone can write, whoever told you that's full of monkey feathers, or something's gotten lost in translation. We don't get permission from Mitch Ryan's family to write about Mitch Ryan. We have a thing called the First Amendment.
Yeah.
You know, if you write something inaccurate,
Right.
they can go after you, especially if it causes financial damage to the family. And if you start writing about copywritten material as if it's fiction, so let's say I want to charge people for my Halloween 5 fan fiction or something. Well, yeah, then you're going to run into all sorts of problems with the rights holders of Halloween. But now you can talk about the Halloween movies. You can talk about Dark Shadows. I can't write Dark Shadows, but I can talk about it.
Right. I really like you got into the aspects of Barnabas losing Angelique, that this was the last, that you talked about this with Dawn, Susie, and me, that this would be the last time he knew he would see her. But you also got to about that in the 1840 arc here heavily, and you got into Barnabas really saying goodbye in every way to Angelique for the final time, and it was really touching in this.
It's all about, at that part of the series, it really is all about goodbyes, and it's all about them wrapping. We've said goodbye to Maggie. We don't really get to say goodbye to Carolyn, but they're gonna live. They just will continue on. But an immortal has to die sometime, and it will have mythic significance. And that goes back to one of the very first conversations Wallace and I had, which was towards the end of the watch through that I did in 2012, where I said Angelique's the hero of the series, technically. And by that, I mean, when you look at the last major action in the major continuity of the storyline, that the major decision that solves everything, wraps everything up, who is it who does it? It's Angelique.
Yeah. She kills Charles Dawson, escapes, takes the head of Judah Zachary, shows it to the executioner and stuff, and then she says, and then that's when Gerard is shot by Desmond, and then you see the head melt away. It's really, really good. And then she gets shot herself by Lamar Trask.
Sure. She's become human.
Yeah, she's not a witch no more. And that's something too you touched upon too in the Dark Shadows Daybook, how her master making her mortal, and the sort of the consequences now that she realizes she's mortal now and she can be hurt, and she has literally risked everything. A lot of good essays in this. What's your favorite one? I have mine.
The essays in the first book stand out to me a little bit more because there are two. There's one that I consider to be the funniest, which is the one about Barnabas loading the gun to go after Adam, and then there's the essay. I know this is sort of a sideways answer to your question. Then there's the essay about domestic abuse with Quentin, Parallel Time Quentin, and that's the essay I was the most passionate about. That's the one that really, really, really sticks with me. In UnBound, the essays were written, probably about 2/3 of them were written later. When Wallace first approached me about, doing selections from the Daybook and putting it out, I was overwhelmed. I did in the wrong way. I was like, God, where do I start? And it was real paralysis by analysis. And so I got a friend of mine's, very brilliant playwright named Callie Meister, who knows writing. I paid her to pick out what she thought were the best essays. And she picked out a lot of good ones. She doesn't know Dark Shadows, and so that was good because she picked out the ones that she just felt were well written, were interesting, kind connected to her. And I used probably 2/3 of those in the Daybook, and then I supplemented it with ones that were important to the mythology of the show, where I really didn't feel like I could cover the arc without, oh, well, you got to include this, you got to include that. So I had this other Meister third left over, and I realized, my God, I could do a whole book just of those. And so that's how UnBound started, is sort of the stuff that was still good, but I had to make trades and changes. And then I kept, you do what you're afraid of doing, and then you gain the bravery to do it. Mm-hmm. And when anytime something good happened to me with a Daybook, like I got the Rondo nomination, I didn't feel like I necessarily deserved the Rondo nomination at first. And so the writing got a lot better, like immediately, because I felt like, okay, now I got to justify it. And I leveled up. And then when the book was being prepared and I was so deep into it, I leveled up again. And so the stuff I drove Wallace crazy, because I kept putting more and more stuff into the Daybook. And I wrote a good one. I got to include it in that. I gotta include this. I gotta include that. And he was like, Patrick, enough. He was never going to stop. So that stuff started to go into UnBound, and so it's much more mature writing. However, I don't remember it as distinctly because the pieces are a little more intellectually dense. There's a piece where I talk a lot about David Selby, and I talk about his Americanness and how he's sort of the Spock of Dark Shadows, and the Dark Shadows kind of a vehicle built for him. I really like that essay. And there's really angry ones dealing with the death of Angelique, and about there's one where I just say, maybe she's just faking it. This is a long game scam that she's pulling. She's only pretended to give up her powers. And that even the feigned death is just sort of some weird plot. But the one before that, or maybe it's right after it, I think it's the one before it, where I talk about how on TV in American society, we have this thing where on one hand, we've been told by Oprah to worship at the altar of forgiveness. Yeah. Forgiveness is really important. And one of the things in the book that I sort of contend with is, what is forgiveness? How does it work? But I have to talk about it because it's part of Dark Shadows. But that on one hand, we love forgiveness. And on the other hand, we love seeing the bastards get what's coming to them, no matter what. And that Dark Shadows has it both ways. And I kind of feel dirty about that. I feel like, God, Angelique really has to pay the price for that split personality that Americans have when it comes, maybe the world has when it comes to forgiveness, and yet seeing that nobody gets away from the bill. Everybody has to pay the bill, and that maybe not.
Yeah, I love how, right, you were talking about how, like you said, Oprah talks about forgiveness. And we love to have it both ways. We like to see forgiveness and the bad person get the comeuppance. But you also later on in the book talk about how, yes, there was a price that she had to pay. But if you look at Angela, you could say, well, she did bad things. So did Barnabas.
So did Barnabas. And morality exists on a very different scale for them.
Yeah.
Because they do live forever, and humans start to seem, it's like, this person's going to die anyway. So I might as well get a meal out of it.
I really love the introduction by Mark B. Perry. When did he approach you about that?
I approached him. I asked him. He I don't quite remember when. I think it was after the first Daybook came out, but I was, looking at his stuff on Twitter, which was, interesting. And I was reading interviews with him about the new Dark Shadows series, and they were right on. And, it's like I learned when I dealt briefly with Leonard Nimoy that my father's advice was right. Well, try to reach out to them. They can only say no. And so he had said something nice about the Daybook. And so I wrote to him on Twitter and I said, Mr. Perry, sir, would you please write, the intro? And he said, oh God, I'd be honored. Yeah. And that was about the biggest standing ovation I could get.
It was really, really cool to see an introduction from him. And he mentioned you in his opening, which I loved. I also love my favorite things about this was the introduction. I really love that you got into the Dark Shadows Christmas Carol as well, and talked about, what is when an idea, about the idea of something and then the idea coming to life and how important it can be. That's what I took away from your essay about the Christmas Carol.
Thank you.
And it really, really hit home.
Yeah, it was nice that all of that stuff started to narratively fit together. Because I'm a guy, I'm still trying to figure out how to work my Leonard Nimoy obituary into the print version of Daybook UnBound. I'll figure it out somehow. But I had all this, in Louisiana we call it lagniappe, all this extra stuff that I wanted to put in there because I definitely wanted to include more memorials. And I definitely wanted to include some essays about the essays because I thought there was some interesting backstage stuff in there. And then I originally was going to do something for the 2012 movie and for the 2004 pilot. And honestly, I was just tired at that point. But I had that Christmas Carol piece, and I thought that Christmas Carol piece, when I wrote it, I was very, very moved. I mean, I really liked that production, and I did some graphics for it, and I really liked working with Ansel Farage. Mm-hmm. He was a really good boss on just to the limited extent that I worked on that. He was very confident, he was very supportive, and he got what I was trying to do with the few graphics I did. And Catherine also was just very supportive. And so I had such great memories. And then, God damn it, there's Christopher Pennock, which is just wonderful that he was able to be included in that. And so as I was coming up with stuff at the end of the book, because the first Daybook just kind of stops. It didn't really feel like it ended. I put in that thing about a new Dark Shadows series, but as these things started to come together, I got the feeling I maybe can do something that has an emotional arc. So it's not just a bunch of catty essays about the TV show, but it's something that maybe emotionally will have significance for Dark Shadows fans. And so Christmas Carol being this thing from both the future and the past and the last big ensemble thing they'll probably do just felt spiritually right to put there. And that was the original ending of the book. And then the other thing that I figured out was because, when I started putting the obituaries in where the actors would appear. Mm-hmm. So, instead of just them all at the end as their own special section, I split it up. And when I got this idea, because originally I had like 1991 and then Ben Cross obituary and then Christmas Carol and Mitch Ryan obituary. And I thought, what if I reverse it? Because we all know that they died and we all know who they are and what their importance was. So it's not like spoilers. Right. And I thought, wow, if you really invest in why this person matters, and then you show their work, I think it actually has more emotional weight. And that really started to work. And so I just got this funky feeling that it was emotionally appropriate and I felt good about it. And it's very dangerous because you can get pretentious very fast, and you can get overly serious and overly caught on yourself very fast. But Dark Shadows is overly serious, so uh, but that's how those things sort of got structured that way. And I'm glad you like that Christmas Carol. I was worried people say, well, what's this have to do with anything? But that happened.
It really hits home too, because when you're reading the end of the book, because it's right after the 91 revival, and you're reading the Christmas Carol, it really hits home of how important it was, not just for the idea of it, but for the idea to be brought to life, and how hard everybody worked. And that's what the essay brings across too.
They did work hard.
Yeah.
It was a production that was put together very quickly.
Yeah.
And it ain't easy, herding cats over Zoom. And they pulled it off beautifully.
Yeah, they did. It won a Rondo Award, by the way. Very, very, very good production. I'll leave a link to the Dark Shadows Christmas Carol in the description box as well. But really, really good. I love the 1841 stuff you put in there. It really, really hit home for me too, the parallel time stuff. Because one, we're covering it, and two,
well, it's thanks to you that it's in there, because you were the one who got me really thinking about it.
Well, to me, I'm like, you know what? I need to do 1841 because it's important. Every bit of Dark Shadows we can talk about is important, and you know that better than anyone else.
Yeah.
It's just something. It's a part of Dark Shadows, and it shouldn't be ignored. And I'm thinking, when I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, I sat back and like, how should I do this? I always do an entire arc in one video. I'm like, you know what? I'm getting so tired of doing that. I want to do this by episode. And I know how strenuous that was going to be. I'm like, you know what? Screw it, by episode.
Well, I thank you for inviting me along for that. That's been really flattering, and it's been a lot of fun. And the Kindle version will continue to be updated, because you can do that with Kindle versions. Yep. So the stuff that's just right now in the print version will eventually show up. If you bought the Kindle version, it will trickle in there. The cool. Artwork, I don't think will. I think that's really hard to pull off with Kindle, but the stuff that I've been adding for the print version, that'll be in the Kindle version also. But the Kindle version's been sort of like beta testing it. I've had it out there, and I can kind of look at it and tweak this or that, and so one of the things I was sort of ashamed of, but again, I was tired. It's a big book. I had written all the 1841 parallel time stuff that I had to say. I said in the first volume. So let me ask you a question. You were about to talk about certain essays that you really liked in it, and I would love to hear what those were.
I really love the Adam essays, because it gave the importance of not just Robert Rodin, but Robert Rodin's character of Adam. And I feel, for those who don't like the Adam arc, you can read the Dark Shadows Daybook and get a better appreciation for Adam and Robert Rodin, really. And especially Robert, because here's somebody who, yes, he was an athlete, but he was an actor too. And how talented he was. And I think the essays you write really demonstrate that too in this book. Those I loved. And I really loved the whole, not just 1841, because we have talked about it, but again, the 1991 revival, the tribute to Ben Cross. And my bittersweet of this all was the fact that you got into the importance of Angelique and Barnabas and their complex relationship that they've always had. And it really, we've talked about how adult Dark Shadows is. This book is very adult in every way when you get into Angelique and Barnabas, and it really hits home for me just as a fan. Like, if I've talked about how your first book, if I didn't get into Dark Shadows, your first book would have helped me get into it. This second book is a beautiful compliment to your first one, and I love it. I loved reading it, and I can't wait to pick up the physical copy.
Me too. I'm very excited about that.
I'm gonna show off that bad boy on my channel. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No. I'm excited. Yeah, it's there's a guy, and I'll mispronounce his name, and I'm so sorry. John Winarius, who does the role play Roger Collins on Twitter, and is a brilliant guy. He's this First Amendment scholar, and he's like a death row trial attorney in New York, and he's written books about fencing and trollop, and he's a brilliant fellow. And, I've been working on UnBound for so long, largely in a vacuum, and he read a draft of it that was relatively complete. And he was so positive. And that really, I was going to connect this to something we were talking about. Oh, yeah. That actually started to make me believe in the project more, because at first, honestly, it was, well, I got some more essays lying around, so I'll put out another copy. Why not? People in Hollywood do that kind of thing all the time. And then I was looking at it through his eyes, and through the eyes of Terry, my editor, and Davey Morrell, who also did some editing on it. It really started to convince me that I had something that just felt, more grown up. And it's, I'm very, praising your own work is very dangerous, because it becomes just too self-congratulatory, but at the same time, that can draw you away from being able to step back and say, in this case, this is okay. This feels good, and this one really does. I mean, the one thing I kind of wish is that I could look at it with fresh eyes. And so being able to talk to you and talk to the people who've read it, is that chance. And people are kind of hesitant to read Kindle books. That they have, I mean, on one hand, the Kindle book has helped, if not kill, at least heavily anesthetize print books and bookstores and so on and so forth. And yet, when you come out with a Kindle book, the one thing everybody says is, well, that's fine, I'll wait for the print version. And it's like, I'll make it $1. I just want you to read it. I just, and so I'm hoping when the print version comes out that, people still remember what the Dark Shadows Daybook was and is. I mean, it's been a while since I've written it, but one of the reasons is that every time I sit down to do something on it, I think, well, that can go in the book. Or I could spend this time working on the book, improving the book. And so that's where that time is gone.
If you're still thinking about how to add an obituary for Leonard Nimoy in the print version, my suggestion would be, when you talk about David Selby as being Spock, and when that ends, have a picture of the OG Spock and talk about the
you crafty SOB. You son of a, that's great. Wallace is gonna hate you because he's been typesetting it. I promise I wouldn't put in anything new, but that Nimoy obituary is a really nice piece of writing, and I've wanted to find a way, and that's a really nice and by the way, speaking of Spock, here you go, because I have a personal story that's tied up with it. And I have a personal story that has to do with a Leonard Nimoy project that takes place around 1897.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I'm within a few years. Yeah.
Cool. I'll, if it's in the print version, I will gladly read it. That would be really cool.
Well, it's on the Historical Society website, so you can read it earlier if you want. But yeah,
I'll go check the website and look for it, and then I'll give it a read on the channel here.
Thank you.
Because I'm going to be covering sometime tomorrow. I'm going to do my retrospective of Sam Evans. Oh my god! But for those who haven't bought this on Kindle yet, I would say, because I I bought mine off my desktop, and I've been reading it off my desktop. So you don't have to have a Kindle to read it. If you have a desktop, you could just read it off there.
You read it off that. You can read it on your smartphone.
Yep.
You can read it on your tablet.
Yep.
And you can, there's a free Kindle app that you can just put onto your computer, or you can read it over the web.
And by the way, Kindle, when you read it off your Kindle or your computer, it saves or you last read. So, which is really cool and really helpful when you're reading.
Well, and there's another trick. I want to see if maybe I can do this. Maybe this will pick up. It's a great trick, and she's getting a lot better. Not that I want to undercut my business with the audiobook, which is fantastic and will be coming out soon. But you can also do this in your Kindle app or Kindle device. Alexa, read my Kindle book, The Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound.
Resuming Patrick's book, The Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, read with Kindle Assisted Reader. There are 3 minutes left in the book. Reading at 90% speed. He's dancing.
Alexa, rewind 10 minutes.
The story is a bit of
Alexa, volume 10.
Nonetheless, Laura Parker elicits the nimble delicacy of the language with naturally cerebral verve. Captain
Alexa,
Lee Scott mixes a...
Stop. So yeah, you got sort of your own sort of audiobook.
The ethical sincerity.
I've created a monster.
Sardonic mischief that is her laudable trademark.
Alexa,
leave it to a...
Stop. Please.
To authors to know exactly how to handle language.
I've created a monster, Joel. I've got to destroy it. Hang on. All right, Alexa.
There is a dog.
You want to dance? I want a polka.
And I am too busy watching her character to be distracted by the rare and long-awaited return of their actor. It took a long time for us to see more of the ways she wanted to explore on the program. It was worth it. Fine.
Yeah, humiliate me in my big interview. I've been waiting months for this. Shh. Anyway, it won't go crazy and you won't have to pull out a knife. That's what I'm saying. Shh, God. She was determined to read that thing and not stop. It's like the red shoes.
Instead of the smart house from hell, you had
just
the Alexa.
But here's the thing about that: when it's not going insane, that's great. Is that the Kindle assisted reader will remember, and so will the Audible version coming out soon, read by Mary D. Johnson. Cool. The Kindle version, if you stop reading at a certain place in the Kindle and you ask for it to read it to you later as you're driving or something, it will pick up in that place.
Cool.
So you'll trade back and forth.
Cool.
And the reader has gotten really good. She started putting in line readings. And, sometimes character will get mad and she'll have a mad voice or, a breathy, passionate voice or whatever. So it's AI run amok. That's pretty good.
I like it. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything. Now, are you working on a third Daybook?
Not yet. I've started to go through the archives, and there's one Daybook essay that just never made it out, and I think it just got lost in the shuffle in any form. So, and that's a really good piece. It was sort of inspired a little bit by Watchmen. And there are other pieces where I'll kind of stumble across them on the website and I'll go, that's a really good essay. That's not in either of the Daybooks. So without getting into the early stuff, which was just weird, I didn't know what I was doing then. There is more Daybook material.
Cool.
It would not be 350 pages worth, but there is more Daybook material. And there is a third book that I would like to write that sort of would go with the Daybooks, but it's very specific, and it's just sort of a philosophical book about Dark Shadows overall. And then the other thing that I've thought about doing is having very slender daybooks that would have material from the first two and then some new stuff, but they would be character specific. So if you wanted the essays that really just focused on Angelique, there's the Angelique edition, there's the Quentin edition, there's, the Mr. Wells edition, whatever. Mm-hmm. The Bruno years. I mean, that's getting a little obscure, but and the reason that those kind of seem interesting to me as slim little volumes is just because I think it would be nice to creatively be able to focus just on one character, but then as a reader to have your Angelique book or your Quentin book and really just focus on them, because there's just so much. And Dark Shadows for me is like Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree. And it just will provide and provide and provide as long as you want to peer into it.
You know who should dress up like Buzz for Halloween?
Like who?
Like Buzz from Dark Shadows.
Oh, Buzz Tackett. Who?
Butch.
Sure. I thought you were going to say Jill Biden, but she would be wonderful. Dr. Jill Biden, his wife. Yeah, Butch would make a great Buzz Hackett.
They would. Shout out to him. Is there anything you want to add about the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound?
There's it was a lot of fun to write. It is a very different book. A lot of the essays were written during or after COVID, during or after the end of that era with January 6th and so on and so forth. We had to contend with the year of 2021, which had a lot of Dark Shadows death. We lost Chris Pennock, we lost Jeffrey Scott, we lost Diana Malay. I'll tell you, and I've said this other places, I really like the Jeffrey Scott essay, because by his own admission, he was not the most polished thespian to appear in that show. He was a very green actor. He was largely an athlete and a model, and to look at what he accomplished with his career was really remarkable, and what sort of man he was really remarkable. And that helped me go back and look at kind of what does Sky Rumson actually represent in this, and why did they pick Jeffrey Scott, and how does he work within the context of the series? And it's one of those things that gets written off, but Jeffrey Scott should not be written off. And I had been too cavalier about Jeffrey Scott, and that's the kind of thing I regret. I did that before I did the Daybook. I said a couple of catty things about the guy on a podcast, and I immediately regretted it. Just internally, nobody made me regret it. It's not like his kids showed up, but I thought, what, that was an abuse of power. And just being the guy who wrote this book is power to a certain extent. It's a position of authority, and God damn it, use it constructively. It's why I really wanted to say nice things, accurate nice things about Roger Davis. Roger Davis gets the short end of the stick, and of course he is a funny guy, and he got away with a lot of stuff when they were filming the series, and he was a very brilliant actor. It still is, and that the more talented someone is, sometimes the more of a response on either end of the spectrum you get. And I remember the very first podcast I ever did was about House of Dark Shadows. And I was on, and I was a real privilege to be on, but I was on with the cool kids. And they started saying things about Roger Davis, about, that Roger Davis, rolling their eyes. And I guess they were. It was an audio podcast, but you can sort of hear the eyes rolling. And I was new enough, and I was the new kid, and so on and so forth. I didn't say anything. And later, that really bothered me because it was not. I mean, they're entitled to their opinions, but I'm entitled to mine too. And to summarily write off a very, very bright guy who brought a very specific energy to the show was wrong. And I didn't know that there were people who, you know, paid a lot of attention to the stories and of just kind of, you know, wacky gags on set and so on. And so it's kind of funny when you hear about them. But you know, as a Louisvillian, Roger Davis was a very important person to me when I was growing up because he was building all these major things and renovating hotels and making skyscrapers. And, you know, I mean, he was the dude and he still is. And so Roger Davis had been a hero of mine when I was growing up before Dark Shadows. And then I saw what he was on Dark Shadows, and I really liked it. I didn't know that there was a dialogue about it. And so I thought, you know, that was another thing where I thought, you know, I've been given this extraordinary gift to be able to write this book and have some people want to read it. And I want to use it for authentic good and for honest good. And, you know, I don't know what sort of person any of these people are when they're interacting behind closed doors and alone. They might be great, they might be awful. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And so I don't know what it was like to act with Roger and so on, but I know that the interaction I've had with him, and I had my first interaction with him when I was 16, was always incredibly positive. Yeah. And I always liked his characters and liked his work, and I thought there's a good breadth of work on the show. And he reached out to me before the Daybook book was even talked about to talk about one of the essays in it, and he had a lot of positive things to say. And he's a former English teacher, so his stuff was very positive, and you know, it's nice to hear nice things. But these were very specific nice things, and we had a conversation, and that was made possible by Tom Hotz. So Tom, thank you. And so, yeah, chances like that, opportunities like that, also meant a lot to me. My biggest regret is that Chris Pennock didn't get to see the later essays I wrote and the final book. I would, because we got to know each other just a very little bit, because I interviewed him with Marie McGinnity at a convention, and so, you know, he was a personable guy, and when I would say nice things, I would send them to him, and you could tell, depending on his mood, that they mattered to him, because he did have sort of an inferiority complex. You know, he writes about that in his comics pretty openly. You know, he's very much in David Selby's shadow. And of course, David Selby's so gracious, he's not going to do anything about it. And David Selby is so ungodly talented that anyone, Laurence Olivier, would be in the guy's shadow. So, but I think Christopher Pennock never felt that he got, maybe not the praise he deserved, but he certainly was important to this show. And really, if I were going to dedicate this book to anybody other than people who are personally significant to me, hands down, no question, Christopher Pennock, who's my hero.
That's awesome. That's really, really awesome. Gonna be some shout outs. We'll tag some people, but really, really great book. If you guys want to go pick up the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, the link's going to be in the description box. I recommend it highly. Really, really touching. Really adult. I love it, Patrick. It was a beautiful compliment to your first book, and I hope we get another one, obviously, because I'm excited.
I would love to write one.
That would be awesome. Shout out to Wallace McBride. Shout out to Tom Hotz. I'll tag Tom on Facebook. Tag obviously Patrick. But Patrick, my brother, it has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, dude.
Thank you, sir.
You have
Bye.
a good night. Bye.